Hey guys, what's up? Hope you're doing well. Welcome back to the Potter Podcast. It's been a little bit, but I want to welcome you guys. For those of you that are watching live, what is up? Hope you guys are well. And today I wanted to do a follow-up off of the previous podcast that I done prior to this. And this one now breaking down and going into what is an appraisal. And so basically I want to break that down for a lot of you guys and why it's important in this market that we're currently in, but also as you go through a real estate transaction, it's important to know what an appraisal is and how it will benefit you as the buyer or the seller moving forward. So what is an appraisal? Well, it's an unbiased professional opinion of the value of a home and is used whenever a mortgage is involved in buying, refinancing, or the selling of that property. So, but I will say that there's an asterisk that needs to be next to that because obviously if somebody is buying with cash, they are obviously not taking out a mortgage loan on that property, and an appraisal does not need to be done. So that is one key thing when we always say in the real estate world that cash is king. That is why cash is king, because when you're using cash or when a buyer is coming to the table with cash, that is the best thing on the table for you as a seller if you are having a buyer that comes to you with a cash offer, because there's some things that you won't have to worry about throughout that transaction, and an appraisal is one of those things. So what makes up the opinion of this appraisal? I get asked this a lot by people, and I'm going to run through a list here of 4 things that I think are important and that I think appraiser takes into consideration as he's going through this stuff. The first one is a visual inspection. So a lot of times they're going to drive by the property, they're going to take some pictures, they're going to probably get out and walk around the property and take a look at it. Sometimes they will even go into the property. Right now with COVID and things like that, there have been some drive-bys, which is basically them just driving by, making sure that the house isn't falling over, the roof is in good condition, and there aren't any other issues that are going on with the house. So visual inspection is key. That's what they're going to do there. 2, they're going to look at recent sales of similar properties in your neighborhood. So they're going to do the same thing that a realtor is going to do when they come and assess the value and they come to you and say, hey, here's what I think we can list the house for. They're going to use that same report and those same similar properties to come up with the price to support what they think that home is worth and the value of that home. So that's why it is important, again, to have a very knowledgeable, experienced realtor when they're coming to basically talk to you about listing your property and what that price should be and why they think that price is a good price to start at. So that is something to keep in mind if you are someone that's thinking about selling your home, is to get that experienced, knowledgeable agent, because they're going to help you with that CMA or that comparable market analysis, which is the same thing that appraiser is going to use when they're going through that. They're going to look at current market trends, or at least they should. This is one thing where we as real estate agents can sometimes get upset or angry with an appraiser when sometimes we don't feel like they take in the current market trends. So for an example of that, that would be like right now in Omaha, Nebraska, and around the nation, basically right now in our country, is that there's a low inventory. And so what I mean by that is there's not enough houses on the market to support the demand that's there by buyers. And so what we've been experiencing and continue to experience is multiple offers and those types of situations. And so to keep that in mind as you're with a seller and when you're going through that, multiple offers are great, but sometimes multiple offers can get out of hand. And so the problem with that is sometimes you can get offers that are $15,000, $20,000, $25,000, even $30,000 or more over the asking price, and it feels great and it looks great on paper, but when you break it down and when you think about it, and when the appraiser comes through, it's still got to get past the appraisal, and you still got to get that value from the appraiser, and unfortunately, they have the final say. Yes, there are things that we can do to try to appeal that process if we believe the value is there and they don't give us that value, but it's a very difficult situation and thing to go through, and a lot of times doesn't work out in your favor. I'm not saying that it never does, but there in most cases won't, because they stand firm on what they view and feel like the value of that home is worth. So that's why it's important. But typically what I do if I'm representing the seller, and if you have an agent that's representing you as you're getting ready to list your home, is to make sure that when that appraiser sets that appointment and comes to the house, that you've laid out all of those contracts and those multiple offers so that he can see those, and he can do his due diligence in trying to come and take in the current market trends into consideration as he's looking at the value of your property and assessing that. The other thing that he's going to look at, and this is the fourth thing, is the aspects of the home, right? So he's going to look at the style, the square footage. I say he, there are she's, so I apologize for that. He or she is going to look at the style, the square footage, the floor plan, the updates, those types of things as well. So again, just pulling all of that information is going to help them determine what that value is worth. So another thing that somebody asked me is, okay, so that's what makes up the opinion. Who pays for the appraisal? Well, in most cases, it's going to be the buyer that pays for that because, again, the buyer is the one that's going through a bank to get that loan. And so in order for the bank to give that loan to that buyer, that's the reason why they're getting this appraisal to begin with, right? So they're wanting to know what is the value of this home because we're about ready to loan a whole bunch of money to this individual or these individuals to purchase this home, and we need assurance that it's worth what they say it's worth or what they've written up on. So the buyer usually pays for that. Typically it's anywhere from $400 to $500, somewhere in between there. Sometimes it can be more. The times that a seller may pay for an appraisal is potentially, obviously, if you're doing a refinance, you're going to be the seller and also kind of, I guess, the buyer as you're refinancing your house. So you're obviously going to pay for that. But some other times you might have a very unique house. And what I mean by that is there might not be some comps or some comparables in your neighborhood to compare your property to, or maybe you made a lot of updates and things like that to the house. And so what you want to do in some cases, if you're trying to decide on a price to list at, is you might want to just have an appraisal done. And sometimes people will pay to have an appraiser come out and appraise it so they know what their value is. Or if you're just someone that is just curious to know what the value of your home is, it's not that expensive to have one done. So there's an option for you as a seller. What should a buyer do to protect themselves? So this is important too, especially in this crazy market that we're in, especially in a multiple offer seller's market. What should a buyer do to protect themselves? We always write in our contracts that it's contingent upon the home appraising at or above purchase price. So why do we put that? Well, we want the home obviously to appraise at the value that we've agreed upon. So for example, if the value that we agreed upon is $200,000, we want that appraisal to come in at $200,000 or more. And why we put more too is basically that's going to be instant equity into your home if it comes back higher than what you agreed upon. No, you don't have to negotiate the new price or whatever if it comes back higher. That's just actually equity that's in your pocket, which is great. The only time that you're going to negotiate price if it comes back lower is right then and there, is when the appraisal comes back below the agreed upon purchase price. That's when you are going to go back to the negotiating stages with a buyer and seller, and you're going to discuss options moving forward. Now, there's some cases here where you need to be careful and know, especially if you are a buyer, what the verbiage is in the contract. So like I said, that contingency that we always write in is that the appraisal must come back at or above purchase price. It's contingent upon that. So if it doesn't come back, that buyer has the option of walking away, right? They don't want to make up that difference. And what I mean by that is, let's say we're going to use the $200,000 price again on a home, and let's say it appraises at $190,000. So now there's a $10,000 gap right there between the $190,000 and the $200,000, right? So that buyer now has to make a decision, and that seller has to make a decision based off of that value and say, okay, are we just going to sell the house at $190,000 now because that's the value of it? Or is the buyer and seller going to negotiate and try to say, well, we want the buyer to make up the difference of half of it, or the $10,000 difference, and then the buyer has to make that decision of whether or not they want to make up that difference. In most cases, I advise my buyers, why would we make up the difference? That makes absolutely no sense. I don't want you to be over priced into that decision and in your house as you first move in, right? Like my job is to protect you as the buyer going through that. So I'm going to say, no, we're going to do an addendum and make the purchase price 190. And if the seller doesn't like it, then we're going to move on. And we have the option of walking away, right? Because of that contingency that we wrote in that contract. If you're the seller, right, and I am going to now represent the seller in that situation, basically I'm going to counter out with some appropriate verbiage that's going to go into the contract, especially if we have multiple offers, right? So in the scenario that, again, the $200,000 house, let's say that we have an escalation clause and we have a buyer that said, hey, we're going to go up to $215,000. And we're kind of going back and forth as we're talking, me and the sellers, and we're saying, well, is it going to appraise for $215,000? Sometimes we don't know. And so we'll sit there and say, well, do we want to run the risk and run the table that it hopefully appraises for $215,000? Or do we want to write some appropriate verbiage in that counter to say, hey, if the appraisal comes back below the agreed upon purchase price, the buyer is to make up or pay the difference of whatever that may be. So let's say the appraisal came back at 205. Now the buyer's got to bring $10,000 back to the table if they agreed upon those terms. So those are how you can protect yourself or how you can get around that in a multiple offer situation and try to still net what it is that you agreed upon with the purchase price. And so if you're a seller, that's something to be aware of and know that there is an option out there for that. And something that I would really do and advise in this market, especially when you're getting 8, 9, 10, 12 offers on a house and you're trying to decide which one to go with and they're all over the asking price. That's where you might say, okay, we're going to counter this out, but we're going to make sure that we're covered as it comes to the appraisal moving forward. So we don't have to drop it $10,000. Like if this person's willing to pay that difference, then they're going to pay that difference. So let me speak on that real quick as a buyer too. You can agree upon that, or you can even write in your, if there's a multiple offer situation, you can say, hey, we're going to pay up to $3,000 difference if the appraisal comes back lower. So let's say it does come back lower and there's that $10,000 difference. You can say that, hey, we're going to pay $3,000 of that. So we'll come up to, let's say it appraised at 205. Hey, we'll go 205. We'll pay $3,000. That still nets you $3,000 more, but the purchase price is now going to be 208 or something like that. So now you know basically what to do if you're in that situation, if you're a buyer or a seller, how to counter that, how to negotiate, all that type of stuff. And I think that's key right now, especially in a seller's market. It's good to know how you can go about doing those things and what your options are, right? So bottom line, an appraisal is another thing that gets done throughout the transaction of a real estate transaction if there is a mortgage involved. And it can delay or even cancel this agreement, right? So that's why that is so important and things to understand about how these things are written into the contract. Because if a buyer says, hey, it's contingent upon being at or above and it comes back below, they have the option of walking away. So again, in most cases, that doesn't typically happen because buyer and seller both want the house. Or sellers want to get out of the house. And so a lot of times they renegotiate that price. But I will say we've been in situations where there's maybe a difference there of $20,000, right? And so the seller obviously doesn't want to lose $20,000. The buyer doesn't want to make up a difference of $20,000. So you run the table again and you hope that you throw back up on the market, hope you get a different appraiser that then comes in and shows a different value for the house. So that's another thing that can happen. There's also an appeal process, like I mentioned, where sometimes a bank will send in a second appraiser to come in and basically try to verify the value there. But what they'll usually say is, hey, we're going to take these two appraisals and whatever one is there is going to be the one that the buyer has to go with. So we're not going to continue to keep sending appraisers in here. They're going to have the option of choosing one or the other, usually the best one that comes in, and then they're going to move forward with it. So typically that's how that whole thing works. But again, another reason why you want a realtor as you're going through a transaction in real estate, because here's one thing that I don't think a lot of people think about, or they think that things are just going to appraise out, but we keep running into issues, especially now moving into the summer and moving into a bunch of these offers going way above asking price. So again, if you're a seller, don't get too excited about agreeing to what it is that you're agreeing to until that appraisal is done. So I always tell my sellers, listen, we've done everything we can up to this point to get you the most that we possibly could for your house. Now we wait on the appraisal and we wait on if that's confirmed. And then if it comes back a little bit lower, hey, again, we got as most as we could get, and we should be happy with that. And so again, you should be happy with that as a seller. You should be happy with that as a buyer too. You know, I always say that it works in the buyer's favor, because if it appraises above the appraisal, it's great because you have instant equity. If it goes below, that's not bad either, because potentially in most cases, what's going to happen is buyer and seller and both parties here are going to agree to drop that price, write up an addendum for that appraised value. And that's typically what happens. Not all the time, but typically. So bottom line is this, you know, you just want to make sure that you know kind of the things that happen throughout the appraisal. If you don't know or you have questions, that's why you ask your realtor. They can inform you on all these different things. So anyways, that is your definition of an appraisal. What makes up the opinion of that appraisal, who pays for it, maybe some pros and cons of what you should do if you're a buyer or seller, and what you should know was all covered there. So hopefully that answers your guys' questions on that, and it's a deeper, I guess, definition of an appraisal there for you guys. So if you guys have any questions, you know you can reach me on social media, text me, call me, whatever the case is. But I wanted to go over that with you guys. Love you guys. Thanks for following. And until next time, we will talk to you soon. Have a good one.